All right. Today's lesson is on the enhanced for loop. I think it's sometimes also called a for each loop, but it's a pretty cool way to loop through an array. So we've talked a little bit about like the loops often go with arrays, like they go hand in hand, and oftentimes you want to loop through each element. Okay, so basically this is kind of the structure you see down here. This is what they look like. And it's a little goofy the first time you get used to it, or first time you see it, but once you get used to it, I think it's actually better than doing the loops the old way. So it's a different way to loop through an array, all to visit all the elements in an array. All right, so just a few notes I had about them is they're just a different way to loop through arrays. So it's a loop, but it's used only with arrays. And I guess it can be used with arrays. Point number two here is you can be used with arrays or array lists, which we haven't learned yet, but we'll learn in the second half of chapter 6. They're easier to code than regular loops, but one of the downsides is you can't change the elements. So if you wanted to like add 2 to all the values in the array, you can't do that with an enhanced for loop. You'd have to do the old regular type of loop. Okay, and then the other thing is if you say you only wanted to loop through the first half of the elements or something, you can't do that with enhanced for loop. It goes through all the elements from 0 to less than the length, right? So that's another one of its limitations is it has to go through all the elements one time. Okay, so I thought a good way to explain this is I'm going to take some code here. So this is a loop that just sums up these numbers. So we have our indexes from I goes less than to numbers at length, plus I, and then we get the ith number and then add it to the sum. Okay, so what enhanced for loop does is this step right here, it does this step for you in a sense. And you'll kind of see that here in a second. So it takes away the having to, because it's going to go through them one at a time and store them in a variable. Okay, so how an enhanced for loop works is I'm going to reset my sum variable to be 0, right? Because I'm going to reuse this, but I'm going to set it to 0. So now I'm just going to do this exact same thing with an enhanced for loop. And so what happens is you type for the same as before, and then the next thing you do is you have to type what variable type is in the array. So this array numbers has ints. Okay, so I'm going to type int and then give it any name I want. I'm going to call it num or something for number. All right, so that's the type of thing that's in the array. Then you do colon, all right, and then the name of the array. So our array is numbers, right? I'm going to pull from this numbers. So basically you do whatever is stored in the array numbers, which is int, give it a name, and then this is where you pull from. So what this is really saying is it's gonna do this line over and over. It's gonna take from numbers and store it in num all the way through the array. Okay, and then what you have access to now, num will just represent all the different values in this array. So I'm just gonna sys out print here just to show you this quick. So I just print out num. Maybe I'll do this with just a space. All right, so basically num is going to take on these values one at a time, right? That's what this loop is doing. That's what the enhanced for loop is doing. So if I run this, you'll see that num just takes on these array values one at a time, right? Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so it's just a num variable changes each time through the loop based on the next number in the array. All right, and so all I'm going to do now is use it here. So I'm going to do sum plus equals num. So I'm going to take that num and add it to my sum, and then I'm going to sys out print the sum at the end. Okay, so if I run this now, I'll get the same 45 as I got before. All right, so you can kind of see, look at how complex this is. You got this bracket I and all that weird stuff. You don't have that anymore in the enhanced for loop, right? It's a much cleaner, simpler way to do it. And I believe Java came up with this because it's so common. This loop right here is so common. Start at 0, go less than the length, increase by 1 each time, and then access the ith element. You do this 11 bazillion times. So what Java said is, since we're doing this 11 bazillion times, let's make it shorter. Okay, so again, it takes away the need to do this line, the access the ith position, And then the loop heading's a lot simpler too. You just do what is in the array, what type is in the array, colon, the name of the array. And that's it. All right. So let's see, where do we want to go next? Let's actually make some. So I have some set up here. So oh, so I did one here. Okay, so I'm gonna have you get this code. All right, so this is called enhanced for loops, and it'll be out on Schoology. So you're gonna find this thing called enhanced for loops.java, this code, and download it and load it into your editor. Schoology will look a little different than it does right now because I'm still in the instruction phase here, but it'll be out there in today's lesson folder. Just find the code and then load it in so that it looks like this. Okay, and then I'm gonna walk you through some of the code for this. All right, so pause the video, get it loaded, and then continue after that. All right, so what I have here is a string of friends. Believe it or not, I'm friends with all these famous basketball players. I guess I should take Kobe off because he's no longer there. Let's add Towns. All right, even though I don't like Towns, but anyways, so this is a regular loop that goes from 0 less than length, gets the ith spot, and then insults them. Okay, so we want to do it now with an enhanced for loop. Okay, so it should run, like when you get it in there and run, it'll insult all those people. But now we want to do it basically with an enhanced for loop. So just as a contrast, this is what our regular loop looks like, but now we're going to do an enhanced for loop. Okay, so if you feel comfortable, try it, right? You could look back to the previous example we did, right, with this ints. Otherwise, you can just kind of hang on here and watch it with me. Okay, so the enhanced for loop would be you do for, and then you don't have to do the 3 parts like you normally do in a for loop. You just have to do whatever type of variable is stored in your array. So it's a string variable, give it a name, whatever you want. So I'm just going to call it friend because it represents one friend. And then I'm going to do a colon and then the name of the array I'm pulling from. Okay, so I'm pulling from the array named friends. That's the name of my array. All right, so this will take this friend and one at a time store each of the friend strings from that array. So again, it goes the type of variable colon the array you're pulling from. So it's pretty simple, but you just got to get used to the syntax. Okay, and then open and close parenthesis like always. And then I'm going to do my insult line, right? But again, I don't have to pull the ith value because that's what's happening right here. It's pulling them one at a time into friend. So I can just do system out print friend because that's the name each time, which again, this changes each time, you know, because it's pulling each different one. And then we'll do our same thing is bumpkin. Okay, so now if we run it again, it'll do the insult twice, once for the first loop and then second time for the enhanced for loop. Okay, so it looks like it's working okay. It does lots of insults. Okay, and again, look at how much simpler and cleaner this is than this, right? So it's, you know, again, they have limitations because you can't change the strings at all, and you have to go through all of them. You can't go through just half or just the first one or something. You have to go through all of them. It's got some limitations, but it's much cleaner and simpler once you get the hang of it. So really, what I want to do with you more is just practice doing this. Okay, so if you scroll down in this file, we have 2 more, one for hairs. Okay, and I want to find the product of all the hairs. This is actually my favorite math class question of all time. Well, I don't know of all time, but it's a pretty good question. And the question is like if you counted all the hairs on my head, right, and then counted all the hairs on the next person in the world, multiply those two together, then went on to the next person after that, multiplied that to the existing value, and this multiplied. So basically took all the hairs of everyone on Earth, multiplied all those values together, what would you get? And you'd think it'd be a really big number, but the answer is pretty simple, actually. All right, so I'm going to pause here, see if you can figure out the answer. Okay, and the answer is it actually would be 0, right? Because you'd hit somebody like Michael Jordan or somebody that's bald, and then once you multiply by 0, everything would be 0 after that. Okay, so we're going to demonstrate this when we do the product of this array. It'll actually come out to be 0. Okay, so I'm going to make a variable, kind of like a sum variable, but this time it's a product. And I want to start it with 1 because I want to do 1 times, right, 200 times 100 times 50, etc., right? And so you can't start with 0 here because then it would all be 0 right at the start. So I'm going to start with a product of 1. And then I'm going to do my enhanced for loop. All right, so again, hopefully you've had a chance to try this. Okay, and so it's pretty basic. You just do the type of thing that's in there. So int, and I'm going to call it hair or num, I guess. And then colon and the name of the array. In this case, it's hairs. So it's going to take these numbers, 200, 150, 400, one at a time, and store it in this hair variable. And all I want to do is update my product. So I'm going to do product is whatever it was before times this new hair value. So once you store it here, you can use it in your loop. Okay, and that's it. Super simple, super clean. Okay, and then I'm going to print out my product after my loop is done. Okay, and we'll see that once we hit the 0, right, it all goes to 0. Okay, last one for you is double wages, and I want to find the average wage using an enhanced for loop. And again, please know that you couldn't, like, let's say I want to give everybody $1 raise, right? It's Christmas time or something, I'm going to give them all $1 raise. You couldn't do that with an enhanced for loop, right? Because you can't alter the values when you do an enhanced for loop. But we could find the average, right? Because that doesn't involve altering any of these. So your job, again, is pause the video and see if you can do this. You can look back to the previous examples for reference. Hopefully you can get this one at this point. Okay, so I'm going to do for, and then I have to do what is stored in there. So it's a double, right? And then I'm going to call it wage and do colon wages. Okay, so that it'll pull from this array, right? Pull a wage value one at a time from this array called wages. All right, so that's the setup. Type of variable colon, name of the array. All right, and then I'm going to need to find their sum. So I'm going to do double sum, start it off at 0, and then add to it each time. So sum plus equals the current wage we're on, one at a time, and that's it for the loop. And then I just got to print out, I don't want to do the sum, I want to do sum divided by however many values we have, which is wages dot length, right? So that should be, again, they index from 0, but the length is normal. So this one will have length of 5, right? And that should get us our average wage. And I'm hoping it's not going to do integer truncation because this is an int and this is a double. So hopefully, let's see if we run it here. Looks like it does actually do double calculations, which is good. That's quite the high average wage. I guess this person's really making some money there. So I think it's right. Okay. So these are just to give us some practice with writing enhanced for loops. All right. Maybe to end, I'll do a couple just sort of questions of what do they do, sort of reading, interpreting them. So if you want to pause the video here and see if you can read what does this enhanced for loop do. Okay, so it starts off with a counter of 0, and then it pulls from this array called values, right? So it pulls them one at a time, each double, and if it's 0, they add to the count. So basically what this is going to do is it's going to count the number of zeros, number of elements that are equal to 0 in the array. So we'd have a double array, and anytime we have a 0 in that, we'd add 1 to the counter. So it counts the number of 0 values in the array. All right, let's see if we can do one more here. What is the output generated here? Pause the video. Right, so this is kind of similar to the last one. It's going to pull from values one at a time, store it in number. And if the number is greater, that value is greater than 4, it adds 1 to the count. So basically, however many are greater than 4. So it looks like these two. So it'll print out, should be a 2. Okay, that's it. Enhanced for loops again, just a different way to loop. That's some ways simpler.